Mixing with my mixing tip, selecting the best vintage compressor for the job. In last week's Mixing with Mike tip, I went over selecting the best vintage EQ for the job. And selecting the best vintage compressor is a natural follow-up to that. And so this sort of extends because each type of compressor, and when we go through the basic types of compressors, we're looking at optical compressors, tube compressors, where Veramu, where it's actually the tube that's creating the distortion, so the compression characteristics, and the rest get into like variations of solid state components. So whether you're dealing with FET technology, VCA technology, bridged diode, however else you want to put it. Most of those others kind of fall a little bit into kind of their own category. But the FET and VCA have unique characteristic sounds, as does the bridge diode. And so many of the sounds and characteristics that you get when you're selecting plugins are also the components that are used within them. So when we look at some of the classic vintage components, one of the most common ones is, and let's just kind of start here, if we just go with the dynamics, would be, let's actually go with the UAD version, the Universal Audio version of the Teletronics LA2A. And what I'll do is I will go with, let's kind of go with the gray face one right here. And so what you'll have with this optical limiter is a staged release, and that's an important characteristic of this, a fast attack and a staged release. So the initial transient after it occurs, there's sort of a quick recovery, but then it slows down for the rest. And depending upon the amount of compression or gain reduction you're getting, that will change accordingly. So if I start here, I'm going to just take like a look at a bass sound. This is like a classic plugin to be used, or a classic limiter to be used for a bass, because what limiters are really good at, especially with a sort of long release characteristic, is that you get enough bounce from the initial release, but you also get a nice smoothing effect with the slower decay on the RMS. So it's almost like two compressors in one, where you have something that works on the peak signal and then a different release characteristic that works on the RMS signal. And that helps to create a smoothing characteristic that works particularly well for certain instruments. So for something like a kick drum, it's a little bit, or like a snare drum, you could put it on those types of things and it may be effective to some greater or lesser degrees, but it's not the most common way to use it because those things don't have long sustains, and therefore you're losing a lot of the characteristic element of what makes it sound so cool. And one of the things that is also a part of this is that it has tubes and transformers built into it, and a nice, really warming, clarifying characteristic on a bass sound, which helps the low end to image really well. So just listen to that. There's a little chorus effect on there as well. Another classic place where we could use an LA2A, where it would have, and maybe I'll just drag this one right along, would be on a lead vocal. So if I put something here on a lead vocal, this can also serve really well in that having the multi-stage release also can play a big part in capturing the characteristics of that. So let's just...
Leaving again, I'll find you again. Pretend. Slow down, baby, take a moment and breathe. I can't hear what you're saying. Stop for a minute, come sit there with me. I can see you're afraid, and I don't know what to tell you. You're scared I might fail you.
Really has like a, now when you listen to this on the track, and we also left the one on the bass, you'll notice how like clear the imaging becomes.
Slow down, baby, take a moment and breathe. I can't hear what you're saying. Stop for a minute, come sit there with me. I can see you're afraid, and I don't know what to tell you. You're scared I might fail you, and so you're leaving here before.
And that's really where the optical component shines. It brings in detail. It's also very good on other forms of instrumentation like strings and something like this. And this is something where, if you have a string part, and I may have to cue up to a place where the strings actually play. So these are not natural strings. These are synth strings. But you can hear like the openness that it brings to them. And that's like, it's like shining a light literally on the sound. And that's just like, one other classic place where you'd use that. So I'll just kind of leave that there at that. Now, there are other types of compressors that will add a little bit more of a warming characteristic, and they can be used on certain things like that may want to richen or fatten up a sound. So here's another classic limiter that can be used on drums, and I'm going to put this on the drum stem here. And this is going to be a Fairchild compressor. So we're going to use this, and now this is a classic. Plugin, a limiter plugin that also has a multi-stage release, and I could use it in the multi-stage form, or I can use it in just a kind of standard fast release kind of form. So the time constant changes a little bit the attack time, because there's not a lot of variation there, still all mostly under a millisecond, and then you get a faster release time characteristic. So that's really the primary changes in the time constant there. And then what we can do with this on the drums is, I'll show you in a couple different ways. One is to add like a depth and a warmth kind of characteristic that adds like some body and richness to the sound. It says the bass and the drums. And so that openness and warmth is like a classic way to get like a real vintage characteristic. If we go over to like a time constant that is, then we're going to get a multi-staged release. And with the bass mixed in, this kind of works really well for mixes and is a smoother characteristic. And this is like one classic place. It also sounds like amazing on a vocal. So like in that same vocal, if we were to take this particular plugin, replace the, and let's just say that we wanted to add like this was recorded with a condenser mic and it's a little bit cold sounding. So now what we want to do is we want to go in and put a little bit of warmth on the vocal. Then this would be like a classic way to do that with the vocal. And let me just go back here for a second, open up the vocal track, and put that in. So again, we're selecting the compression or the limiting based on the sonic characteristics that we want to enhance within the original sound.
Too wide or mountain too high, I won't let goodbye be a final reply. Baby, we're far from the end. So come on, baby, let me help you believe in you and me, come what may. Yeah, 'cause I will stay here for as long as you need. Don't keep pushing up.
So let's hear that in the track. Sometimes it can sound very subtle just in its initial thing here, and then when we put it in the context of the rest of the music, you hear the difference.
River too wide or mountain too high, I won't let goodbye be a final reply. Baby, we're far from the end.
So I don't really like the release characteristic. I'm going to go here to something a little bit more akin to what we had with the drums, with a little bit more of a multi-stage release.
River too wide or mountain too high, I won't let goodbye be a final reply. Baby, we're far from the end. So come on, baby, let me help you believe in you and me. Come what may. Yeah, 'cause I will stay here for as long as you need. Don't keep pushing away, 'cause the stories they tell you are just meant to scare you from being here with me where you belong.
So the tube and the transformer characteristics add a body and richness to the warmth without making it muddy. It's a great way of like using the components or the characteristics of the components that make up the compression and also the components that are part of the design of the actual unit to actually bring in the body and characteristic without doing it with EQ. It's a much more rich way of bringing in the tonal character or something or filling out something. Because if you go in and you start throwing EQs on it, like a good vintage EQ will allow you to bring in some of that warmth, but a lot of that warmth is because of maybe the transformers, like an Neve component. That I think I may have done last week. Like that might be like a classic thing that you would go in there. Like another classic one for drums, like if we were going for a much more aggressive sound, would be more of like a FET compressor. And this could be like something that I'll just show you very quickly here with the CLA 76. So the silver face version, right? So this is just, this also has transformers in it. This is an earlier version. It's a brighter version. And this is like one where we can really grab and get a little more of a pumping. Whoa, okay, a little bit too heavy. Let's take the bass out here for a second. Like just a classic heavy pump and breathe type of thing. I could slow down the attack, still like less than a millisecond, but very fast release. And with this, I can kind of pump life into it. It's just you hear what it's doing to the bass in here. It's just like killing the bass. But from the perspective of just the drums, I think I would isolate the bass out to different outputs. A great way of bringing presence and depth into to a sound. So, and that's kind of like a classic solid state design, and a place where you would use something like that very effectively. Another way to bring out punch and using something like this, like okay, let's say that for an acoustic guitar. So I'm going to bypass that. Put those guys over there. Would be another great one would be the DBX 160, and this might be really good way to bring out some punch, say in an acoustic guitar. And then if I take this on to over here to another track and put it on. This is a classic way of adding like a punchiness into the sound. So go back to it. And in this case, it like in a subtle way, you can also use this like amazingly well on drums. Like VCA compressors just work ridiculously well on drums. This is like an example. You could kind of go on and on and on forever and ever. But what you'll find is that if you start matching up certain types of compressors with certain instruments, VCA compressors go really, really well with anything you want to be punchy: drums, percussion, guitars, rhythm guitars, where you want, the attack to kind of really punch through. The FET compressor can be good for so many things, but just that slam kind of effect on drum techs, really amazing. The Fairchild compressor with the tube compression, the Varamute compression, and those amazing transformers and tubes that are part of the circuit. There's something like 24 or 26 tubes in a 670 in the original unit, including like 11 transformers. So it's like an incredibly rich, deep sound. The LA2A and its classic openness and presence that it brings, like shining a light on the sound and making low-end image really well. When you start to understand what the characteristics of these components bring in and the tonal shift that they create with the sound, then you start to step into the world where you can like completely change the sound of something without going into equalization. So the vintage component side of things, it's more about selecting the right component based on what characteristics are going to be brought out from the components that are included. And if you got a good emulation, it will kick ass. All right, there is our mix tip of the week, and that is selecting the best vintage compressor for the job.